Welcome, everyone, to the Fermentation Association's webinar of Coping with Regulations and Regulators with celebrity chef, author, and entrepreneur, Jeremy Umansky. He's an old friend of mine here in Cleveland. We've known each other for quite some time, and I can attest he knows everything about fermentation. The mad scientist. So some brief introductions real quick. My name is Drew Anderson. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Cleveland Kitchen. You may have seen our products around. We make a variety of naturally fermented, live probiotic sauerkrauts. And we also just launched a line of fermented dressings that just went out nationwide to Whole Foods. We've been at it for about 7 years and really enjoying the fermented world. So I'm also on the advisory board of the Fermentation Association, which is a trade group that was launched to support producers who use fermentation to create delicious and often healthy food and beverages. TFA has the goal of helping to educate consumers about fermentation and its benefits, supporting scientific research into those health benefits, and working with food safety authorities to establish clearer and more appropriate regulations in regards to fermentation. Today, we're going to be talking with Jeremy about that last topic, regulation. For those who don't know, Jeremy is the chef owner of Larder Delicatessen and Bakery. He's got an extensive background, not only in just cooking, fine dining, from New York to Cleveland, at the James Beard level, but agriculture, farming and foraging. He also has co-authored the book Koji Alchemy with Rich Shi, who actually will be doing a webinar in August. So tune in for that. But he's kind of lived through the process of starting from nothing and building a business around fermentation and for commercial sale. So we've got a number of questions ready for Jeremy, and please submit any others during the session via chat. And thanks also to our sponsor of this webinar, Chelsea Green Publishing. They are the publishers of Koji Alchemy and also have a backlist of titles across the spectrum of farming, health, sustainable living, and more. So Jeremy, welcome and thank you.
Thanks, Drew.
Yeah. To jump right in, why don't you give us some background on how you got into food, developed a passion for fermented food, and kind of leading up to your current business at Larder and Koji Alchemy book.
Yeah, early on, I grew up in a family that loved food, as many of us do. That was the central underpinning of who we are. This Jewish family from Cleveland, and highly ingrained too in like a lot of Eastern European food traditions. Most of my family's from there. Those foods are have large amounts of fermented foods in those cuisines. So growing up, they were always a part of what we were doing. I remember early on my grandmother's horseradish, her frame that she would make, this shredded horseradish with beets. She'd grate it, she'd chop it. She wouldn't measure anything out. A little bit of vinegar, a little bit of salt, and then let it sit on the counter for the whole week leading up until Passover to make sure it had that extra room for it. So early on I was exposed to it. I didn't really necessarily connect with foods as fermented foods though until much, much later on. I eventually went to culinary school in New York, in the Hudson Valley. And at that time, I was really fortunate. I was very active with Slow Food and a few other food activist organizations and got to host Sandra Katz for just about 2 weeks in the Hudson Valley. I was one of the co-convivium leaders of the Slow Food chapter in the Hudson Valley. So I was tasked with taking Sandra around to all these events and come to my apartment and have dinner, and it just great experience. And really at that point is when I just kind of dove into it and just made a connection with, fermentation, what it is on many different levels, not just for our food, but also on these, and Sandra's got a great book coming out about this philosophical level, harnessing and taking care of these microbes, and then in turn how they take care of us, and why they evolved and we evolved along with them, all these really, really cool aspects of it. So eventually I found my way back to Cleveland. And my wife Allie and my business partner Kenny, we start up this business, Larder Delicatessen and Bakery. We really wanted to harken back to what a delicatessen felt like and ate like, and the experience of it was, 100, 150 years ago, where you could walk in and see barrels of pickles and hams hanging from the ceiling. I, I attended an event last night with Phil Rosenthal and Lana Rabinovich, who are experts on deli culture. Phil's got this great show on Netflix now. And it was about deli culture. And I believe it was Lana that said, deli equals fermented food. They weren't talking about fermented foods, but she said deli equals fermented and pickled foods. And that's what we wanted to kind of bring about. So we set out to creating this delicatessen where we would make our charcuterie in-house and our breads and our pastry and all our pickles. And, I'll be damned, I don't think there's a single thing that we produce at any point that doesn't have something fermented in it. So, here we are. We've been open 2 years now. We produce a very wide variety of very highly seasonal products. Everything from amino paste or things like miso made out of our rye bread, up to our standard bear kosher dill carrots, that we're able to get year round compared to a cucumber. So, we do a lot of fermented, and it's so much fun.
It's so delicious too. I don't know if I mentioned this to you, but we travel quite a bit for the company, and we do a lot of work with chefs across the country, and they find out I'm from Cleveland, and they're like, yo, have you been to Larder? Do you know Jeremy? What's it like? We've been hearing there was all this buzz generated, and when it launched, and it's everything that listeners, you come to Cleveland, you got to go to Larder. It's unbelievable. You're really bringing all the old school traditions back into the limelight here, which is cool.
Yeah, which I think you kind of touch on something there, like right off the bat, right? These old school traditions. So these foods have been made with these specific ways for thousands of years at this point. And anywhere you go in the world, for the most part, fermented foods are the crux and the root of any cuisine, because it wasn't until the past 100 years, let's even say the 1920s in the United States, in the developed worlds, that people had electricity running to their houses. Really, it wasn't until right around World War II that a refrigerator, an electrified refrigerator in your house was commonplace. So people have relied on these foods and the methods for making them for so long. And it's interesting now that we have so much fear and intimidation and kind of unknowing about, their production and how they're made and if they're safe or not, when we've kind of proven like society would not exist as it does if it weren't for these foods prior to refrigeration. So we've already established that much.
I think it's really interesting. When we started our company, it was the regulators didn't really know how to handle fermented foods, and it's funny, it's ironic because the human race has been doing this for thousands of years, and we never worried about it before. But now in this modern age, everything has to be pasteurized, this and that, and X, Y, and Z, and so kind of paving the way for good regulation that keeps the food the way it should be is key here. And maybe we could jump into some of these questions here, but what do you think the current state of fermented regulation is in the United States? And kind of be specific a little bit, or keep in mind that there's probably three types of listeners on the call right now. You've got people that are in restaurants, but I know you're an expert there, and how to ferment in restaurants. You've got small people are taking a hobby to the next level and maybe going to a farmer's market, local avenues, little local delis. And then you've got people that are scaling a manufacturing business and trying to take a fermented product nationwide. So.
Yeah, and bring about those kind of three, I don't know if we want to call them layers or sectors, of food service. We have three different avenues of production and retail. And we kind of have one set of laws to govern them. And that's kind of the issue. So essentially what it boils down to is our regulation is more or less a mess. And from locale to locale and oversight body to oversight body, things are different. So we're both in Cleveland, in the city of Cleveland. I'm overseen by the city health department. You're overseen by the state health department. We're both producing fermented foods, but because of how we're producing them, where we're producing them, and where we're selling them, we have different sets of regulation. Same foods, different sets of regulation, and when you talk to different people, you get different answers. Yeah, you know, it's kind of as a fermented food producer, it's a very frustrating and almost difficult, like intimidatingly difficult place to be in. Because there's really no good resources as to where to start, how to get going, how to, you know, do what you're going to do in the safest manner possible, while also, you know, maintaining a specific quality standard, which is so important for us, and making sure the food is delicious, right? Like these are things we can't overlook. Safety is first and foremost, but it's got to be of the highest quality and it has to be delicious. Because if you don't have those two things added onto the safety, you're not going to be in business. Nobody's going to give you money for your food. You know, so it's really interesting, and I think overall in the U.S. things are more or less a mess, and we can. I think on the extreme opposite end of that, let's say like Japan, where, you know, market stall after market stall, especially in big cities and even rural areas, you have fermented food producers, you know, in these great open air markets, and everybody's there and just hawking their wares and that sort of thing. You know, I haven't really seen too much data pointing to how they produce versus how we produce and incidence of foodborne illness and that sort of thing. But I'm going to go out on a limb here and say they're at the same or even lower than us in relation to the consumption of these fermented foods. You know, so it begs one to question, like, why haven't we taken a model from the Japanese or the Chinese? Or you look at like what René Redzepi is doing in Copenhagen with Noma and all the other restaurants there. You know, Scandinavian cuisine is very, very fermentation forward. Eastern European cuisine is. So why haven't we kind of looked at what their regulations are? And I think some of that is us being Americans, and, you know, it's the wild, wild west, and we do things our way, and, you know, other people's ways are good for them, but not for us. I think we kind of have to first philosophically like dispel a lot of that, especially in food production, and start looking at some of these other, you know, regulatory bodies about that. Because from being a market producer to, you know, just a broadline distributor or whatever we would call, you know, what Cleveland Crowd is, to being a restaurant like Larder is, you know, the questions that were asked by regulators, or the things we're asked to uphold, when it comes down to the root of them, they just want to make sure the food is safe and we're producing it correctly. But how we get there is so different across the board. How we keep records, how we track production. You know, it's very easy for you. You have a set line of products. You know, while you do develop new products and that sort of thing, you have a set line of products that you make fairly frequently year-round. Nar is one of my favorites. You know, in the restaurant setting, we're in much more flux. In very conservative restaurants, you'll have maybe 2 menu changes a year. Most other chef-driven concepts, you're looking at least 4 changes a year. And in places like Larder, we change our whole menu every day, aside from like a couple of items. So in these chef-driven concepts, for us to develop a HACCP plan or a set recipe for doing something when our ingredients are changing, the seasons are changing, what we have access to is changing, and even our supply chains change consistently. You know, one farmer we buy from has a crop failure, so we buy more of something from another farmer. You know, it's really difficult in a restaurant setting to be able to account for those, especially when we're buying smaller. I'm assuming, like you guys at Cleveland Crowd, you buy how many pounds of cabbage at a time? How many trucks?
I think we are probably 100,000 pounds a week.
Yeah.
Yeah, but,
So,
yeah.
So at that level, for you to consistently source and have that reflected in your house up and everything, traceability is really easy. In my case, where I'm sourcing from 30 or 40 different suppliers, little satellite farms around the restaurant, that urban farms, spreading out a little further, and I'm getting a mix of product, and then I'm using that mix of product. I had a cabbage from one farm and I had from another. You know, where is the regulation? Well, it's a mess. It's almost impossible to keep up on.
So we've got some questions starting to come in here, and just to add on to what you're talking about, I think there's a big cultural difference. United States is such a young country, modern United States is such a young country, that in a melding pot that we've kind of lost, a lot, I think. And we were in Tokyo at a food show last year, and the restaurants would just have fermented things on the shelf, ready to go, and they just pick it out and put it on your plate. And it was just, the culture is just, that's safe to eat, that's fine, we're doing it the right way, we've done it for thousands of years. So bringing that model over could be hugely beneficial. But I want to jump into it. Quite a few people are asking, how do we start up? How do we write our first HACCP plan? I've got a very specific question from Jacob, who started a small fermented foods business in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Said his main issue trying to start is dealing with a food industry and culture which does not understand fermentation at all and are not very willing to approve my processes and procedures for non-baked ferments. Any suggestions on how to navigate this?
Yeah, I think, so what any regulator is looking for is, they don't, for so long now in food service, whether any of these tiers or sectors that we've discussed, we've looked at regulators as the bad people. We don't want them coming around. It's a hassle. Like, oh my God, I've got so much else going on to run my business. Now I got to deal with you. We need to completely flip that around. So we've got to, on some level, become, at the very least, colleagues with them, if not friends. Colleagues is a more cautious approach because, there's regulation against fraternizing and all that stuff and preferential treatment. So, there is a professional line that has to be established with them. But we need to have just open, honest conversation with them. And if their departments, let's say you're working with a local regulator, if their department doesn't know, or I hear stories quite frequently, or doesn't really care, and is more like, we don't want to spend the time looking at this extra set of regulations, it's so much more paperwork for us, why can't you just cook a burger? That is very, very frequent. It's a pain in the butt, but you just got to keep going up the chain. So if your local regulators aren't willing to work with you, or just want to shut it down because they don't understand, go up to the next level. Go up to your county, go up to your state, or even reach out to federal. Because people are producing these foods all over the country. So there is regulation for them. What hasn't happened is, in Albuquerque, New Mexico, maybe they don't have the same standardized food code that they adhere to that we do here in Cleveland, or in New York, or California, or wherever it is. So these are the problems we have. So, I wish I had a better answer than keep going up the ladder, but that's what you have to do. That's where we are. And this is why something like the Fermentation Association and meetings like this, and hopefully, we'll be able to do this in real life in a post-COVID world, is so important, because we have to be able to address this issue of there not being cohesion and there not being easily accessible information for those of us that are producing these types of foods.
I 100% agree with you. I know that when we started, we're regulated by the Ohio Department of Agriculture, as well as the FDA, but our ODA rep really didn't know what to do with sauerkraut. We have big manufacturers in Ohio, but they aren't.
Did they know to at least put it on a hot dog or something?
They're like, that's all they knew. It's, no, you put this on a hot dog, right? And then you cook it. No. So, but we were like, you know what, let's become close with the ODA rep, and she was fantastic. And we would call her and say, hey, you know, we're on our third facility now, but each time we would move to a new space and build a new kitchen, it was, let's call her first. Here's the plans. Is this how you want us to do it? You know, like, and you involve them, and they start to own a bit of the process, and they, you know, bring them into your process a little bit here, and let them know that you appreciate. You got to understand, when they go out, they know that people don't like them. They know that people don't like them. They know that they're the enemy when they walk in their kitchen. And so if it's a pleasure to work with you, and they can see that they're actually helping someone, you know, that always helps. It's still a people business. Food is still people business. So I think it's important to be close.
Most definitely. I had someone reach out to me about a month ago saying they, you know, were working on basically things like sauerkraut in the restaurant, and their city agency, like, they really didn't have protocol up, and the inspector was super testy. So they got a HACCP from somebody, got the code listing from another jurisdiction close to them, and sent it to their inspectors, like the head of the department, and had a conversation with them, and was like, listen, I really want to do this, and I want to do this safe, and I want to do it by the book. And the head of the department was basically like, thank you for sending all this. Go ahead, let's start production. I want to see that you're doing the HACCP, and we will in turn eventually get our code updated to reflect some of this.
Yeah.
I don't hear many stories along those lines, but it was like super refreshing to hear. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to it too, because you do get, you know, some, just like in any industry, right? For some people, it's just a means to the end. For some people, it's just a way to get food on their table and pay their rent. You know, I've seen that for years with line cooks, and I'm like, how do you not have passion for this? And they're like, I just need to pay my bills. You know,
Yeah.
so you can see that with some inspectors too. They just, you know, don't want to take the time. They're not interested in the food. They're interested in upholding the regulation that they have set forth. You know, that can be difficult to work with, but reach out to the department. Maybe you can make a case that you would like an inspector who has a better understanding of like craft food culture and what you're doing. Not to necessarily make the inspection easier on you, but to get more understanding and leading to more approval of what you're doing.
Yep. 100%. Elena Shu is asking, can you share any information on sources or places to get information when you're writing your first HACCP plan for fermented foods?
Hi, Elena. She's awesome. She makes some really cool fermented foods out in San Francisco. Check her out at Shared Cultures. So HACCP is a pain in the butt, and I also feel for Drew. I feel for like your sector, HACCP is a fairly good fit. You know, generally speaking, all around. For a small craft producer who's selling at farmers markets, or for a restaurant that's, you know, highly seasonal and lots of menu changes, HACCP is not a very good plan, because HACCP requires you to do one thing the same way all the time. No variance even in ingredients and sourcing and that sort of thing. And, you know, for, smaller restaurants and craft producers, it's essentially improbable, right? Like, that's what it boils down to. So you're still going to need it, though, because that's what the regulation says you need. You can attempt to write your own. And if you Google how to write a HACCP, like, there's tons of stuff that comes up. It is not easy to understand at all. It's not easy to do. One of the better things to do is to reach out to your local regulator, whether it's city, county, or even your state regulator. A lot of them know of or host their own HACCP seminars. And, you know, they're not fun classes, but you can go and you can actually sit down with someone who's, HACCP certified and learn how to write a plan. Personally, I don't feel it's worth an individual's time. 40 to 60 hours easily once you're kind of even in the groove with HACCP plans. For someone that doesn't work with them all the time, it's a lot of work. For larder, we worked with these great food safety consultants in Columbus, Ohio, Kellerman Consulting. Brian and Mickey Kellerman are fantastic. I'd say ballpark, depending on where you are and what the market is, pretty standard HACCP plan will run you give or take $500. It's definitely a worthwhile investment, and you should definitely save up and get them done. If you're going to do it though, let's say you're a small producer or a restaurant, try to look at, like we got lucky at Larder, like even though we change our menu all the time, every day of the week, 365 days a year, I have my pastrami sandwich on the menu, and that has sauerkraut on it. So we were able to write a core HACCP for that sauerkraut because we produce it all the time. We have it there. It's easy to do. So that's, you got to pick a starting point. And if you're a small producer, find like one thing that you know that you're going to have most of the time that you can start to build around. Because the great thing is too, when you meet with your regulators and you are proactive and you say, hey, I have this HACCP, it's whether it's being approved or it is approved, they're going to be so stoked that you've already taken that step and that they haven't had to have this conversation with you about, well, you need this, and that sort of thing. So that's a great place to start.
Also, if you're doing live products that have low pH, like sauerkraut or kimchi or different beverages, and you're not pasteurizing, the regulators should look at that and say, this is safer than a pasteurization. You don't have the risk of botulism, which is really like a big fear, where a lot of this regulation was put in place.
It's the fear that all, and this comes out of, the Food Purities Standard Act of, I think it was like 1930, 1932, something like that. Botulism was the fear because that's what everybody was getting because canning technology wasn't up to par at the time. And everything is trying to address botulism. The great thing is, though, even, as you said, non-pasteurized fermented foods, there's like, I don't even think there's any reported cases of botulism associated with it. It can't survive. Like there's salt and there's acid.
pH too low, yeah. Just tying this in, Robert's asking if we're familiar with any software to guide and keep track of HACCP manufacturing. Have you used them? Are they valuable? I mean, I don't know what exactly you're trying to do, Robert, for manufacturing, like myself. We wrote our first HACCP. It was a pain in the butt. We got it out there, but it was like an evolving thing, and each time we changed our production, it got better and better until we could afford a food safety consultant to go through and do that. And now HACCP for us is, we have it, but it's kind of a thing of the past. We were focused on SQF and Primus GFS and the big certs there. But I know that there's software out there. I've never used it. I don't know if you've ever seen any software like that, Jeremy.
I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it or used it. I know it exists. I'm not sure to, if it's worth it versus just,
sure.
Here and there hiring a consultant to, you need 3 plans, see if they can get, just drafted for you and paid and that sort of thing.
Usually states offer some type of course you can sign up for, or a couple $100 course. It's grueling, but it'll get you the bare bones of what you need to get started. So kind of wrap that up and moving on here. Getting a couple.
I know Justin Severino. He's a brilliant chef and charcuterie maker in Allegheny County in Pittsburgh, and I believe last time I talked to him, I haven't seen him in close to a year now, but last time I talked to him, he was the only certified and licensed person for HACCP in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, and had an instance where some new inspector from the health department hadn't been to one of his classes yet. So Justin teaches the health department how to write HACCP. He's a chef. And this guy tried to give him problems. And it just, funny story because, you know, Justin called the kid's boss and the kid's boss berated him. But yeah, sorry, I just thought I'd share.
So, moral of the story with HACCP is try and get as much information you can, take a first whack at it, become friends with your regulator, and step by step, you know, get something down on paper and learn as much as you can.
And in terms
There's
of
a lot of free stuff out there.
like exact names of the courses, not sure, but call your regulator and say, do you have a listing or do you offer any classes that teach you how to write a HACCP? You know, and they will have a list for it. They may not be at convenient times either, or they may be a couple months out or that sort of thing, but you know, they exist and they're there.
Yep. We're getting a couple of questions, one from Miles, one from Jay. They're both kind of about fermenting and foraging wild foods. So I'm kind of interested in this as well. So kind of the safety precautions, and Miles specifically says, what are you using primarily seasonally local forage ingredients in our products, and we're not sure of the regulations on whether or not they can use foraged fermented products, and that always seemed like a tricky one to me.
It's a really, really tricky one, and it varies state by state. So in Ohio, you can use wild foraged ingredients, so ingredients that don't come from a zoned agricultural area, so a piece of land that is taxed as a farm, as long as those ingredients come from a licensed processing facility. That is all the state statute says. So for larder, I went and I got a mushroom expert certification that allows me to forage several dozen different species of wild mushrooms through the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Living, or whatever they call their Department of Ag there. After I got that, I reached out to my state agency and said, hey, I have this license. I also have a food service permit in Cleveland, in the state. The two of these combined make me a licensed processing facility, and the answer essentially was, we think so. So based on that, we run with it, you know. So it's going to depend on where you are. There are some states that have laws on the book saying you cannot use anything that doesn't come from a farm. And in fact, there's been some cases in the past couple years of restaurants that have had like herb gardens or some tomato plants outside being deemed for harvesting from those and bringing them into the restaurant, because it didn't go through this proper established channel of agricultural distribution. You know, so it really, and a lot of these things we're discussing today, it depends where you are and who your regulators are and what their, you know, their codes are. So with the wild foods, I would get, wherever you are, I would get whatever licensing you can to establish yourself as a certified professional, first and foremost. There's, I think, about 10 states that do it right now. Most, from what I understand, Michigan and North Carolina, I think, were the first two in the nation to have them. So most states accept theirs because the other states design their programs after Michigan and North Carolina. So they're kind of like this gold standard in terms of USDA and you know, interstate commerce and that sort of thing. So find the closest locale to you, get the license, then check with your location and see if they'll accept the license. If they don't, find out why. Because I remember having a conversation with the Secretary of Michigan's Department of Agriculture, because they actually are on site to oversee the test for this. And they said, if Ohio gives you any problems, here's my office number, here's my email. I will happily send them any info from our department to back this up. So yeah. And then from there, you know, when it comes down to it, the uh, the biology, the physiology of these wild ingredients, they're really no different than domesticated ones. So in terms of using them and things that may come up like, oh, it's more susceptible to this type of contamination or that, I don't really think there's much science out there that just, can prove that or even disprove that. As far as I'm concerned, you'd use them with the same protocol that you would for any other ingredient.
Right. We actually, years ago, when we were kind of just starting up in farmers markets, and we would do a lot more seasonal, and so we foraged wild ramps and fermented them, and it was okay with our regulator because there was as long as, for us at least, there was like, what's your kill step? Our kill step is fermentation, and we test it through pH. And they're like, great, as long as you're doing that, you're good to go. So we were okay then, but again, it's like you're saying, having conversation with your regulator. And another good source of information, I mentioned finding a course for HACCP online. There's commercial kitchens popping up all over the country. We actually started at one 7 years ago, and generally they're source of information. And so even if you don't end up producing, they're going in and chatting. Sometimes they have a course, or they're there and they're a good resource. Obviously, they'll probably want your business, but at the end of the day, they should be able to tell you, here's your regulator for this type of product. For a HACCP, go, here's the local course, you want your serve safe, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So reach out to your local commercial kitchen.
Yeah, in my experience too, most commercial kitchens, especially in larger areas, actually, it's really weird. The ones in more urban areas and the ones in like extreme rural areas typically have somebody on staff that knows how to write HACCP or is teaching these classes or that sort of thing. So a lot of the rural areas, so many cottage industry and home businesses produce canned foods and that sort of thing. So they're used to dealing with regulation along these sorts of lines, and they're a great source of information.
Absolutely. So we've got another question in, kind of moving from Dennis Wang. What physical operational considerations to prioritize when seeking a space to produce, store bacteria-centric foods, and specifically natto?
Yeah, I mean, so this is a really interesting conversation, right? Because when it comes to deliciousness and quality and the uniqueness of your food, microbial terroir is so important, right? Like that's why the cheesemaker uses wooden shelves so that the beneficials and the molds can get into the wood and create this bioflora that's going to reflect on quality and deliciousness and also safety, by that extent. But most regulators are not going to be happy, and they don't want to see that. So you need to look up essentially what I would look up is the local ordinance for what a restaurant has to have. Do you have to have FRP, like this textured, easily cleanable and sanitizable wall covering? Do you have to have a specific type of paint that repels grease? Can you have recessed lighting? Do the lumens have to be a certain count? There's regulation for all these things for producing any type of food. And I don't really think there's all too much more above what a restaurant would do for a fermented food producer. There's probably some different things, but I'm going to say a restaurant regulation is going to get you 90% there easily. In terms of, where drains have to be located, how many hand washing sinks, 2 compartment sinks for washing things, 3 for washing foods, 3 compartment sinks for, sanitizing your utensils and all that stuff. What your refrigeration looks like, your walk-in, your uprights, all those things. So it's really going to depend on where you are and what's required of you. As you go and you decide, let's say you're going to make old school barrel ferments, and you're going to contact like a Quercus Cooperage in the Hudson Valley in New York. They make barrels for everything from making sauerkraut to beer to vinegar and all sorts of things. If you're going to go in that route, have that conversation with your regulators. Like, no, I'm going to be using wooden barrels, and do what you can to find info from other either existing code or scientific literature that says, well, this producer of this fermented food is making it in a wooden barrel. I'd like to do the same. I may not accumulate alcohol, but I'm going to have a pH drop that is just as effective and just as an effective kill step. So you're going to have to kind of look and see what you can do and who's going to let you do what you want to do. Don't be discouraged too if you're told no. Like I said, Drew said, like, go up to the next level or come up with another way of producing, that's in compliance. And maybe you can tweak your methodology and your recipe. All right, so you're not getting all those like nuance and cool flavors you want from the wooden barrels, but maybe you can do it in a plastic tub with an added spice that makes it just as cool or unique, and that sort of thing. So maybe there's ways that you can work with it that way.
Yeah, I can speak to, when we first started out, it was small. We worked with our regulator. We built our first kitchen, and it was very much what a kitchen would look like at a restaurant, like FRP paneling. Here's the thing. This is how many washing stations we have now. As we're bigger, we've got a 30,000 square foot plant. And
true. Who designs that? We specifically, when we were building our restaurant, we worked with an architect, but contact your local restaurant supply company, because a lot of them have specific types of architects that specialize in food service design. I know there's 2 of them in Cleveland. So that's really important to work with, compared to just someone reading the health code who's an architect who's never seen it. But yeah, go ahead.
As you get bigger, though, when you're getting into manufacturing, if that's the route that you're going to go, there's next levels of certifications: GMP, Primus, SQF. They all require above and beyond that, but it's to get going, to get on shelf. You can get by with having the basics of a restaurant, which is great and easily attainable. People do it every day. Quick question here about production. How can you maintain like a clean label while preventing yeast and mold spoilage when you're making things in the back there?
In terms of like unwanted contamination, is this what
I think that the question from Maria is really about, on a nutritional panel, instead of using ingredients that would add shelf stability or length or preservatives, that kind of thing, but still combating the adverse, if the wrong type of yeast gets in or a mold or something like that. So how do you guys control for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's super simple, and I'm sure you experience this. Refrigeration. That's it, and keeping air out. It's an anaerobic process for most styles of fermentation. So, keep them sealed up well and keep them cold. There's pros and cons to each one of those, right? Like if you want to keep them warmer, hold them at 90 degrees, 100 degrees and do accelerated fermentation. Like, yes, there are people that do that. But there are also people that it takes them a month to make their sauerkraut because they're keeping it in, a 55-degree walk-in cooler. Versus, 72 degrees ambient or 90 to 100 for accelerated. So, a lot of times people get contamination from things like cam yeast. Cam is more or less benign. Food safety isn't so much an issue really with cam itself. It's more of a quality and a taste factor. But once you get cam yeast growing on, it can lead to other food safety issues because one yeast can grab hold, a pathogen could, whether it's a yeast or a mold or even a bacteria. So, keep them airtight, keep them under the brine. Do all your best practices and monitor them. A lot of times people who ferment, they when they mash it, they put it in the container, and then they walk away for a week. No, check on it several times a day. Make sure it's doing good. Make sure any surface mold that's starting is removed right away. Make sure you're tracking the salinity. If water evaporated and you have to adjust up or down, like, you need to be able to figure these things out. So you can't just, that's a huge thing. You can't just kind of set it and forget it with fermentation. It has to be an all the time thing that you're constantly checking on. Because if you do that, you're not going to have issues with, this type of contamination. You're going to be able to stop it before it spreads.
There's a million type of different yeasts and molds and they all, you're going from, if you're going above 70 degrees in your fermentation room, like, you're going to experience something totally different than, below 60. There's all kinds of, for us, it's, we make sure that, the lactic acid bacteria on cabbage, there is a ton of it. And so you can wash the cabbage pretty well, and there's going to be still a lot, way more than you need for a great ferment. But you do want to get that, it's coming from the field. There's stuff on there that you got to clean it, and then you just got to make sure you're, like you're saying, check on it. If your water weight's leaking, you'd much rather know in the first week than a month down the line when everything's, who knows what's grown in there. So, yeah.
Yeah,
maintaining
and I see a lot of people use weighting stones, and I've heard from a couple people over the years, and they found out too late that the weights they used were porous, and they got like contamination inside the stones, and that became an issue. So like, there's these things that you have to look at, and if you're going to use that type of material to ferment with or ferment in, you have to be that much more vigilant than someone who's using like glass and plastic and that sort of thing. So
yep. We get a question kind of in line with the preservative. Tracy's asking, do we know any clean label preservatives, something like natamycin? I've never heard of. Again, we just, we use refrigeration, so I'm not sure.
Yeah, and we don't use any preservatives outside of what's naturally produced.
Right.
Yeah, I know there are some of these clean label preservatives, but this is something that I just started becoming aware of about a year ago. I really haven't done too much research into them. Yeah, wish we had a better answer, Tracy.
Yeah. Luckily, if you're trying to get on shelf across the country, refrigerated sets are growing. More stores are offering more fresh products. You're also seeing dairy sets shrink a little bit, and so it's making a little more room for products like ours that need to be fermented. And people kind of understand that if it's in the refrigerated section, it's probably going to be a little more premium. It's going to be cleaner label, and so they're willing to pay a little more. So the trend is good for fermented products.
Yeah.
So we've got one from our friend John Gray on the board of TFA here. When do you see the FDA creating regulations for fermentation or natural products?
Oh, God. I mean, that's anybody's, guess at this point. It's a pipe dream, but I hope it will become a reality within the next, let's say, 7 years. But there's a lot that has to happen. There's so much bureaucracy. We need organizations like the Fermentation Association. We need fermented food producers to work together and to lobby and to funnel. Listen, the way our government works, we need to funnel money and influence to those departments and say, hey, this is needed. And we also have to back it up with the economic benefit, right? Like, we have to say, okay, here's some money to look at these studies and this sort of thing and draft some regulation. But also, just so you know, on the flip side, here's the economic projections for how much money and tax revenue we're going to be able to bring back from your investment of creating this regulation. So these are the things that a lot of people are overlooking, and these are the things that are so important for us as producers, as associates, to push and to start doing. We're a capitalistic society. We've got whether you're, like Elena in San Francisco and producing and doing farmers markets, or you're Kikkoman, or you're somewhere in between and you're Cleveland Kraut. Like we've all got to work together. It's the same goal, and we can find answers for everybody. And that's what we have to do. Who knows when it's going to happen, but I hope within 7 years. It's a really big task you have to understand too. There's a lot of undertaking. And there's going to be some people too that just don't care, or even people that don't want the regulation. So that's going to be part of the battle too. Hopefully they'll be grossly outnumbered though.
Yep. I think the TFA is going to play a big part long term as well, and advising that, and the partnerships that we've got with the USDA, the group of scientists down at North Carolina State, and all the research they're doing. Eventually, this is going to culminate into something good, we hope.
Yeah.
So we're getting, we're kind of running up here, but we're getting a lot of questions about commercialization of Koji and regulations around Koji. And if you could take just a couple of minutes and chat about that real quick.
Yeah, so I think, so the biggest hurdle for growing Koji is it's held in the danger zone. Like most of your inspectors, especially if you're in a restaurant setting, okay? And this is where my expertise with it is. Outside of restaurant production, I've met some commercial producers, haven't gotten too deep with them yet, like how they handle and what kind of regulations they jump through. But in a restaurant setting, you're holding rice in the danger zone for 48 hours. They're concerned with like Bacillus cereus, like that's what they're concerned with. For us early on, I've got to look and see where I have it filed away, but we got a food code translated from somebody in Japan, for growing Koji. And our opening inspector reviewed it and was like, okay, this is what you're going to do? And I was like, yeah. And then I use it as a marinade and these sorts of things, and they were fine with that. Luck has it as a draw and we get inspected 4 times a year because we're classed high risk. We never know when the regulators are coming, but we've never actually had Koji actively growing when we've been visited. So outside of our initial inspections, these conversations haven't really come up again. We were granted to go ahead and do something with it, so we've been doing it. And, until it gets called out again, we'll work with it then if we need to go deeper with it. So, have the conversation, say what you intend to do with it. University of Tokyo is really good, and they have a lot of information out there. You're going to have to find somebody to translate stuff for you if you want to use that as verified, quantifiable data that you can show a regulator. There are also a couple domestic producers like Cold Mountain Koji and South River Miso, and Miso Master, I think, is another one. They've been doing business. I think Miso Master's been doing business in the United States since the 70s. And I think they're in the Carolinas. It's you can do it. You can find ways to do it. So if there's too much hurdle and you can't grow Koji, you can still source it and use it and make these different products with it. And some of the things that you make with them don't necessarily or technically fall under the guise of fermentation. Like when we make amazaki, we take Koji and we take rice and water and we cook them together. It's a long cooking process, but we cook them. There's no active fermentation going on. And then we can use its enzymes to our benefit. And enzymes aren't living things, they're types of proteins. And they can effectively denature, with pasteurization. Once they 160 to 165, they start to become inert and stop working. They're optimized around 140 degrees Fahrenheit. So, there's many things that you can do to start working with these things until you find what your regulators want want you to do going all in and doing it from the ground up. So, yeah, I mean, that's my advice. And like I said, if you can't grow koji yourself, get some pre-grown koji, because you can buy it and the companies producing it are cleared for interstate commerce and this sort of thing. It's a GRAS ingredient. It's generally recognized as safe. So there's nothing that says you can't use it. There really isn't anything that says you can't grow it, but there isn't anything that says you can grow it per se, depending on your jurisdiction. So it's, once again, I wish we had better answers with some of this stuff, but it's so variable from type of producer to type of regulation that you have.
Yeah, I think we're bumping up against the end here. I think some of the high points is, start the conversation with your regulator. They don't need to be the enemy, like they're the gatekeeper, so why not be friends with the gatekeeper and have these honest conversations, use examples that you found from other manufacturers, other chefs who are doing it well, and bring them to the forefront. Say, hey, here's how it's done safely in so-and-so location. Can you work with me so we can put this into place here? And over time, develop those relationships and really work with the regulators, I think is key here. But any last comments, Jeremy?
I see, I'm just seeing some questions feed. So I see just 2 questions I just want to touch on really quick.
Yeah.
One from Holly about, types of crocks. Listen, I get the whole plastic thing. I'm with you 100%. But if it keeps your regulator happy and allows you to run your business and make money and get your delicious food out there, you have to ask yourself what sacrifices you're willing to make. So that's part of that conversation. And then Carolyn had a question about like CFU claims, like counts of bacteria in food and this sort of thing for health benefits and that sort of thing. Me personally, I think that's just a crazy gimmick. I think it's something that some of these larger companies that started selling probiotic supplements that wanted to compete against like wholesome natural foods that contain a wider variety of bacteria and are more useful to your body and your body recognizes more readily than opposed to this freeze-dried and stasis states. I think they're just marketing crap. So go ahead, put your sauerkraut up against any brand that's labeling it. I really think it's just kind of irrelevant. Like any fermented food is going to be good for you. So we're not in the game of necessarily saying one is better than the other or this sort of thing. And just eat all fermented foods, enjoy them all, spend your money on all of them and all the producers making them. That's what's important.
There you go. Well, again, I want to thank you. And if you guys haven't checked out Koji Alchemy by Chef Jeremy Umansky, it's a fantastic read. Some really interesting stuff in here. The Fermentabot that MIT is developing that you wrote about.
Easy.
I'll look into that.
Yeah.
But
there's also,
again, thank you so much. What's that?
For people too, we wanted to do kind of like the first thing with this book. So it's not a signed off on HACCP plan, but we have an example of a HACCP plan in the appendices of the book. So you can kind of see what you're getting into and make a decision if like, is this something I can do myself or do I need to reach out for help? So there's a lot of people who have just never seen one. So we wanted to make sure that was included, and that's in the book there.
Great. Jeremy, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you. And join the Fermentation Association. It's important.
Yeah. Thank you very much to the Fermentation Association and our sponsor, Chelsea Green Publishing. We hope you guys have learned something today and come back to our next one. Thank you so much.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.